All right, comrades, welcome to New Jersey HorrorCon. We have an incredible panel for you today. The amazing Violet Ramis Stiel, author of the book Ghostbusters' Daughter. Please welcome, make some noise for Violet Ramis Stiel. Thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I'll ask a couple questions to get things started. As soon as I see hands going up out there, I'll start calling them out. I actually want to wanted to talk about what you referred to in the book is absurd child syndrome. I think it's a great insight into the tone of the book and the tone of your relationship with your dad. And it's a thing I've tried to explain to like 15 people, and I've just butchered it. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain to the audience and how it sort of shaped your journey with your dad.
Yeah, I mean, my dad really referred to it a lot. It's this sort of psychological construct that, when you're small, your parents sort of explain the world to you. They tell you, right and wrong, the government is good, police are here to protect you. And then as you get older, you realize that some of those things aren't true, so you can either think that you're crazy or you can think the world is crazy. And if you think the world is crazy, then you have to laugh and you become an absurd child. That really informed his comedic perspective because he just saw okay, everyone is nuts.
I remember even reading that in the book and just feeling like so much of his comedy started to click with me, like even more as I was reading some of these things. So again, just really awesome stuff. Also, you talk a lot about growing up, being on your dad's different film sets and stuff, which I imagine felt totally normal to you at the time.
Yeah.
Do you ever remember there being a point where you realized that oh man, my dad's not just my dad, he's also this really famous, super important guy, or was that just kind of a slow cook? Or
I mean, I think Ghostbusters was the first movie that really sort of had a big cultural impact that I was aware of. I mean, I know Animal House and Caddyshack were important to other people.
Very much, yes.
But none of my friends were watching those movies at 7 years old. So when I was in third grade and Ghostbusters came out, it really sort of shook things up, and I realized, oh, okay, this is actually cool. Sort of.
Was it ever strange to try and explain your dad's fame to your kids?
I mean, yeah, they didn't really see him sort of in his heyday necessarily. But, they loved watching him on TV, and they said, oh, Grandpa looks so cute and young. They love it.
Oh, that's super cute.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a chance for the audience? Any questions yet, or still a little cold? Because I can keep going. I just want to give you guys your shot.
This was the first book I wrote. My dad and I had talked about writing a book together, actually, about parenting. And then he got sick and we weren't able to do it, so this was sort of my way of doing that for him and just sort of trying to keep all the lessons that he gave me alive. It took about 2 years. Really right after he passed away, I just started writing down every memory and story I could think of, and it was just for myself. I didn't want to forget anything. And then as I kept sort of expanding and filling things out, I thought, well, maybe other people would enjoy this too.
I think a lot of other people are enjoying it. I was actually curious too, being that you're kind of the head of a large family yourself now, did you pick a particular film of your dad's to be the first film you showed your kids?
I think we started with Ghostbusters because it's the most family friendly.
Definitely.
I am not so good at deciding what's age appropriate, so my kids watch a lot of inappropriate things. But
we also grew up, I feel in an era where there was a lot of things kids were watching that weren't that appropriate.
Right. So Vacation, I think, was the next one, and that's a hard R. I mean, there's nudity, there's a lot of cursing, and they loved it, of course. But when they said, "Oh, can my friends come over?" I was like, "No, no, we're not showing this movie to your friends."
Oh man, that's classic. Anyone else out there, guys? Just want to give chances. So I'll look out every now and again. If I don't see a hand, then I'll just keep going with it.
He did. I mean, I think, because the first Ghostbusters was such a huge sort of phenomenon for them, that right away there was a lot of interest in doing a sequel. And so, it was 5 years later, I think.
Right.
You know, in one scene in the movie, they, you know, suck in your guts, guys, we're the Ghostbusters. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a lie. I mean, they had all sort of gotten a little more comfortable and enjoyed the success of that movie, but they were really happy to be back working together. You know, it wasn't sort of like the magical feeling that the first movie had, but it's got a lot of great stuff in it, and I think it, you know, definitely upholds the sort of Ghostbusters legacy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Actually, touching on that, if I could, you talked a little bit in the book about, you know, when your dad was writing the script, like scanning your every movement for, like, you would breathe, you'd be like, what line are you on? What did you just read? And stuff like that, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But then, you know, as you just said, you know, you felt the film maybe didn't quite fully capture the magic of the first movie, which, I mean, almost no sequel does, you know. Almost no sequel does. But I was wondering if your attitude towards Ghostbusters 2 has kind of softened over the years, as you've seen, like, all these other franchises that go, like, way off the rails.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have more of an appreciation, even for the original, now than I did then. Then I was kind of like, oh, all right, like,
I can see that.
It's all right. But, you know, just seeing sort of the legacy that it's carried on and how passionate, you know, the fans are about the movies and just the whole universe of Ghostbusters.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of really rich material there and so many great performances.
Oh,
and,
yeah, amazing.
You know, they're still just kind of also weird movies. I mean,
it is, yeah, but that's part of what's magical about it.
Yeah.
Actually, if I could riff on Ghostbusters 2 for just one more question. This is one of my favorite parts in the book. You talked about meeting Bobby Brown in your tween years. And like, I tried to picture myself in that situation, like if I had met like Christy Swanson when I was 10 years old or something like that. Like, were you like up all night the night before, like, what am I gonna have to say something cool, or was it like really spur of the moment?
So excited. No, I mean, I knew I was going to the set and I was hoping that he was gonna be there, but you know, you never know with these things, and I always tried to sort of play it cool, but as soon as they told me he was, you know, around, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening.
Do you remember like what you said to him, or?
I don't think I said anything. I think I blushed and looked like a total dork, and he was nice, and we took a picture, and then he went away with his posse.
I probably would have been the exact same way around Bobby Brown, you know, like a total schoolgirl.
Yeah. Well.
But anyways, another thing you talk a lot about in the book is your dad's relationship with Bill Murray, and your, you know, you refer to this concept. I don't know if it was your dad who originally started saying this or not, but as your dad as being the guy with the map, and Bill as being the guy who's allowed to go off the map, and it kind of, you know, stuck with me a little bit, and I kind of get the sense from the book that your dad took kind of a similar approach to parenting, mixed with, you know, what you guys talk about as giving up the illusion of control.
Right.
And I was just wondering, when you became a parent, did you find it difficult to have to be the one with the map while simultaneously giving up the illusion of control?
Yeah, I think it is a struggle, because he definitely was the guy with the map, but you know, a map that's also constantly changing, where you're not really sure where it's going, or you think it's taking you here, and then actually it goes in another direction. So I think that, you know, just because you have the map doesn't mean you know anything. And that was sort of the big takeaway. You know, in terms of him and Bill's relationship, I think that's why they worked so well together, because they really complemented each other. And Bill is so unpredictable; you never know what he's going to do. And my dad is sort of, you know, the steady, straight man.
Yeah.
And you know, you have that with your parents and your kids too. I mean, everyone has a role to play, and when everyone's playing their role, you get along. And when someone goes off script, then you know.
That's true. Then it turns into a soap opera.
Time for a family meeting.
Yeah, big character turn. Anybody else out there? Questions, guys? Anyone? We get in? Chris?
I think this moment right now. I think it's hard. I'm a pretty private, low-key person, so trying to imagine what an audience would be interested in. I know the stories that I loved the most. I know all the things that I really cherished about my dad, but I wasn't always sure what would translate into a reader, you know, finding some meaning in it. So I think, you know, trying to get out of my own head and see it from somebody else's perspective was a challenge.
Well, just sharing your pain. This is definitely very hard for me too. I am very awkward on stage and not good with the mic and all that stuff. So no, you're too kind. Thank you so much. But you also talk in the book about the fact that you weren't really necessarily head over heels about the first Ghostbusters, but possibly being due to the fact that you were on set and like kind of seeing behind the curtain and taking the element of surprise out. And I was curious if you ever felt that after being around so many of your dad's sets, that if it kind of took the magic out of movies in general for you, if you saw, too much and like a movie is not as magical as it used to be.
I think that there is something to that. You don't want to be in the kitchen when the cook's making the sausage, I think is the other sort of phrase about that. But, I think it was good in a way because, here we are at HorrorCon. I was never scared by horror movies because I knew, there's a guy, behind the camera, throwing pea soup at Linda Blair or whatever it was. So, I knew that it wasn't real, but yes, it means that I was never sort of as affected maybe as other people were by the magic of cinema because
I could see that for sure. And Ghostbusters was probably one of the first horror things I ever watched as a kid.
And it was scary.
3 or 4 years old, and
that
Rick Moranis turning into a dog scared me. I actually still feel super bad for him when he's outside the restaurant. Of all scenes in movie history, he's out there banging. I'm like, this is so real. This would exactly happen at some upscale New York Manhattan restaurant.
Everyone looks and goes back to there.
Little Rick Moranis, I feel so bad for him still. So in the book, you also talk about how you and your dad wanted to write a book together on existential parenting.
Yes.
Is that something you're still considering? And what have you learned recently from being a parent that you would add to the book?
Yeah, I think this is sort of as much as I could do in that vein without him. He taught me a lot, but I'm just not as wise as he was, and I don't feel like I'll ever be. And maybe he also felt that way.
Very few people probably feel like they could be as wise as the guy that taught us about particle reversal and stuff like that.
But yeah, definitely now, my oldest is 16. It's a whole other ball game. And, miss my dad a lot during those moments just because you want someone that has the perspective to tell you, it's fine, this won't last, and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. So another aspect of the book I really enjoyed was you always, talk about, how grateful you were for being your father's daughter, and you're very, candid, you're very honest about the downsides that can go along with that, too. Kids, swarming your dad with Ghostbusters questions, we pick you up from school, and later on, even being bullied and stuff like that. And I was wondering if there was something you could say to kids growing up in a similar position to yours. What advice might you give them to help them through the rough period?
Whether it's similar to mine or not, I just feel like it's hard growing up. Just being alive sometimes is really tough. Even when we have privilege and we're very lucky to, be here talking and doing this. But yeah, I think you gotta have as much support as you can. And if it doesn't come from your family, you gotta find it from somewhere else. And also the perspective to know, there's a bigger world out there. You can change things, and it doesn't last forever.
Very, very true. Very true. So another shot. Everyone out there, got any questions at the moment? Chris?
At the risk of asking too many Ghostbusters questions.
Bring it on.
Over the years that Dan Aykroyd was very interested in making Ghostbusters 3. Was that something your dad was as interested in doing, or was he good just having done 2?
He was good having done 2, and he was totally willing to do a third one if everyone else had wanted to and it had worked out. I think he worked on at least 2 or 3 different versions of a script. They didn't get super far because they could never get everyone on the same page. But he loved Ghostbusters, and he was really happy when he did the voice for the video game, which I hear some people call Ghostbusters 3 in a way. And yeah, he loved it. He was really proud of it. I think he would be amazed by, sort of the community and world that exists now around Ghostbusters. And it's too bad it didn't happen, but that's life.
Yeah, if any series I would have loved to see as a trilogy, obviously, the original cast. Also, I'm sure you get a billion Bill Murray questions, being his goddaughter, but it's very well covered in the book, and I don't want to spoil too much. I do, though, kind of want to ask about Brian DoyleMurray, if that's okay. Because, you know, he worked with your dad on so many amazing films, and judging by the book, it seems like he was kind of a lifelong family friend.
He was.
And you've said that about your dad that Knocked Up was the closest of his roles to the real Harold Ramis, and I was curious which of Brian's roles in your dad's films you see is the real Brian Doyle, the closest to being the real Brian DoyleMurray.
I mean, he is such a character. And yeah, they started together at Second City in Chicago. So, you know, I mean, really their entire careers and lives. I don't know. I mean, you know, as the mayor of Punxsutawney in Groundhog Day, or
oh man, because I was totally just watching that and thinking like, I bet you he's like this.
He is. I mean, he's a pretty jolly, you know, gregarious guy. When I was young, I mean, and they were like writing Club Paradise and stuff. I mean, there would be like bottles of, you know, Remy Martin like lined up outside the hotel room every morning, and you know, they were definitely in their party years. He's also great in Vacation. He plays like the cabin keeper when they go camping, and you know, spitting watermelon seeds onto the floor. I mean, he's just a really funny guy. He was on Veep last year, and he was so great also on that.
Now I gotta get HBO back.
Gotta do it.
Cool. Anyone out there questions, guys? Okay. Well, don't get me wrong, I can keep going.
No, why not?
Did your father talk about SCTV much as the foundation of his career?
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. I just love to hear any anecdotes you have that you like to tell about.
Yeah, I mean, he went to SCTV when everyone else sort of went to Saturday Night Live, and he was, you know, really happy in Toronto with those people because it was like such a great, also again, such a great ensemble. You know, Eugene Levy and Joe Flaherty and Andrea Martin and Catherine O'Hara, and more, Dave Thomas. But I think, you know, they kind of were doing whatever they wanted out there. It was like there had been sketch comedy on TV before, but not sort of what they were doing. So they really could run with all these ideas that were great. And he just felt so lucky to be able to like be working and laughing with these people that he loved all day. So yeah, it was a great experience. I was born in Toronto while they were working on that.
It's been awesome. Speaking of, you know, Toronto and Chicago, Second City, and all this stuff, you know, the book spans a pretty vast geography from LA to Hydra, Chicago, New York. I was curious, being a Chicago guy myself, of which city do you think your dad was happiest in?
He loved Chicago.
Chicago guy, right?
Definitely.
I always got that vibe.
He'd never sort of, I mean, he was fine in LA, but it was not his scene at all, and he always sort of felt like, I'm not cool enough out here. But in Chicago, he was a hero, and he really loved it.
He's definitely a hero, yeah. Big time hero everywhere, not just Chicago, but especially in Chicago. Actually, kind of shifting gears here a little bit. One film of your dad's you said wasn't necessarily your favorite, and I'm not trying to, you know, give you a hard time about it. I'm sure you get these a lot, and I apologize.
It's okay.
But it was Multiplicity, and
Yes.
I love that movie. So naturally, I was curious if you could kind of elaborate on, you know, did you get into a little bit in the book?
Yeah. I mean, listen, my not loving it doesn't mean I hated it.
Of course
You
not.
know,
Of course not.
I think that there are a lot of interesting ideas in it. I think Michael Keaton does a great job, and I just felt like it was maybe, I mean, it's a weird thing to say about a clone movie, but like almost maybe one-dimensional. Like it was just about such a specific view of what manhood
I could see that.
is.
Yeah, I could see that now. Like,
sort
you
of
need someone to take care of the kids. You
white
need someone to go to work.
privileged suburban constructs where it's like that's not all men are. I mean, that's what he sort of was and was struggling with, so that's what was interesting to him. But I just felt like if you're going to do something about all these different parts of your identity, like you can go farther with it. It just felt like
No, I
safe.
can totally see that now, actually. That's
Okay,
really
good.
interesting take on it. I hope it doesn't ruin the movie for me, but I'm sure nothing could.
Well, maybe somebody can make it again.
Oh, no, let's not remake any Harold Ramis movies. They're perfect. I was actually curious always if the fact that his name is Doug Kenney in the book, is that a nod to,
Yeah.
that is a nod to,
Yeah.
to Doug National Lampoon's Doug Kenney.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering, this is kind of, it's off the top of my dome, but I think they're working on a movie about Doug Kenney right now. I think David Wayne is doing that. Is that anything you've
They
heard anything
did.
about?
I mean, so there was a great documentary called
Right.
Drunk, Stoned, Brilliant, Dead.
Yeah.
And then they made a film, Netflix did, about sort of that same era called A Futile and Stupid Gesture, which was Will Forte played Doug Kenney, and this comedian Rick Glassman played my dad, and it was great. Gilda Radner. I mean, all the people are sort of in it represented. It's funny.
Wow.
It's weird to see someone like playing your dad on acid. And,
Yeah, that's got to
all
be
this
interesting.
stuff. But I don't know if there's another project coming, but there's definitely a renewed sort of interest in that time and those people. There's a movie out now about Gilda Radner
Right, yeah.
also. And
A documentary, right? Or is it a movie?
I'm not sure,
I think,
actually.
yeah. I need to get my Netflix updated as well as
Yeah.
my HBO. But being that, we've talked about a little bit about Chicago and, vacation, I find it really interesting in the book that you're talking about a little bit your dad's relationship to John Hughes, and that they were both, Chicago guys, both National Lampoon alums, but like not really friends per se. And then the fact that your dad and Chevy Chase did a really extensive uncredited rewrite on the movie,
Right.
And it kind of took it from being the 13-year-old son's perspective to being the
Right.
father's perspective, which I love. When I saw interviews of your dad talking about that, he goes, "I wanted to be about the guy that tries to be a good dad. He only has 2 weeks a year to do it."
Right.
It's such a great concept in general.
Exactly.
But you also talk about your dad being somewhat unsatisfied with the final product of Vacation as well. And then I've also read that John Hughes actually wasn't necessarily in love with the film, even though it probably broke his career in a lot of ways. But he also said that the experience made him want to direct, that he saw how little respect the writer got on the set. And I'm sure not from your dad, obviously. But
Oh, that's so funny.
but I was wondering if you ever thought that maybe your dad and John Hughes were maybe a little too similar to, like, really happily mesh as collaborators.
I mean,
or-
I think maybe they were like two sides of the same
Similar
coin. I
coin.
mean, I think John Hughes was clearly more interested in sort of the adolescent
yeah,
experience.
the stories about young people. Yeah.
Yeah, and he, told them really well. And he certainly captured a moment in
Oh, yeah.
time, in a certain place. And I think my dad was just he was not interested in that. He was
Right.
more interested in, growing up and being what kind of adults these kids turn into.
Yeah, very true.
And so, it's understandable that they wouldn't have necessarily, been the best buddies. And my dad did love Vacation. I think the ending was a puzzle that,
Right.
he wasn't fully satisfied with. But the movie overall, he definitely had a lot of affection for.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he must have for all his movies. So we want to give another chance for anyone in the audience to ask any questions out there. It's totally fine with me. I have a million of these written, so.
Curious, you could elaborate on how he felt dissatisfied by it?
They filmed a few different endings. One of them where I think they took Roy Wally hostage and, took him to his house. And, I think they just didn't... The whole movie was about sort of the journey. So then once they get there, then what do you do? Like, how do you make the big climax? And, it turned out fine. I mean, I recently did like a showing of Vacation for when the book came out in New York, and I'd watched it sort of in advance, and it's definitely also a product of his time, as many of those early movies are, and there are a lot of things in it that you would just never put in a movie today. I mean, when they get lost in East St. Louis, and every black character is sort of like a stereotype and not so thoughtful.
Right. Those are like very common for those movies.
It
back
is,
then.
and it's
Yeah.
not, it's not to take anything away from it. I mean, and yet, that was hard for him too, and he found those things, difficult to sort of watch and get behind, and it's just part of it. So I think, he couldn't even watch Caddyshack because he just felt like it was such a mess. But that's like one of the most beloved comedies ever. So I think it's just about sort of the same way that we're cringing at ourselves up here on stage. I mean, it's hard to be really happy with the work that you do because you always want it to be the best.
True, very true. Another one I want to get into, as an actor, I always felt your dad was like incredibly gifted at carrying the heavy load in like almost every scene he was ever in. Like from explaining all the science and all the rules in Ghostbusters to carrying like an enormous chunk of the emotional responsibility in Knocked Up. The one performance of your dad's I always felt was kind of overlooked was a short one, but it was in As Good as It Gets. And I was curious if you had any memories of him doing that film.
I mean, he had a couple little parts in different movies over the years, and As Good as It Gets is one that people would always stop him and just say, I cried,
God.
you were so reassuring, you were the perfect, doctor, like I just knew you were going to take care of everything. And he was, he kind of was that guy. So I think Knocked Up, was sort of effortlessly him, but all of the parts that he played, I mean, he was not an actor. He's not Daniel Day-Lewis, so it's not like he was really going into someone else. I mean, he was just highlighting parts of himself, and he was the goofy, cool guy in Stripes. He was the reassuring doctor in As Good as It Gets, and he was the yuppie scum and Baby Boo. I mean, he was all of those things, and he was adorable.
That is adorable, absolutely. So guys, anyone else out there? Questions at the moment? Okay, all right, I got plenty of these written. I just want to give you guys your fair chance, because you're all fans too. Being that you have so many, Hollywood friends and stuff who adore your dad, is there any temptation to have like Judd Apatow or Seth Rogen try and adapt the book into a movie, or?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, certainly if someone wanted to, fine. Like, I don't feel sort of possessive of the story anymore. I really wanted to just give it out. But we'll see what happens.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm not knocking down anybody's doors.
Very cool. Got one out there?
I never read the book yet, but I look forward to reading it.
Yeah.
Do you think your father is happiest as a writer or a director or a performer? I mean, since they're typically such different roles or such different personalities.
Yeah. I mean, I think he really loved directing because it was so collaborative, and it can be stressful, but it's fun to be on a movie set and to sort of watch your vision be actualized. I think he really liked writing with other people. Also, again, the collaboration. I mean, he said, you need two people for comedy. Like, someone has to laugh to know if it's funny. So I don't think he loved being sort of at the computer or at a desk by himself, but he really liked working with people and also with acting. It wasn't maybe his favorite thing, but when you could be doing it with people that you really respected and liked, and doing something you enjoy, then it's great. I mean, that's where the SCTV and Second City training really comes in. It was all about, sort of the group dynamic, and he really held on to that.
If I could riff on that really quick, you talk a little bit in the book about, being at a certain point, realizing, I think it was on Stewart Saves His Family, that you didn't want to, pursue a career in filmmaking and stuff like that. I was wondering if, you maybe never felt the acting bug or the directing bug. Did you ever, think about, other than writing the book, being a screenwriter or anything? Or are there, doing work in comedy, or is there anything like that?
I've thought about it. I mean, I've thought about it, and I'm going to sort of take the next few months now and see what I can come up with. What I don't like is, I'm just not good at the schmoozing. Right. So, putting myself out there in that way is a challenge. But I do like doing the work, and I feel like I have some things to offer. So
definitely, absolutely.
We'll see.
Well, we will be looking forward to whatever comes next. I was curious if you had, since we're on the topic of comedy, if you had, anything you learned from your dad, any advice you would impart on anyone at the beginning of a career in comedy?
Well, what he always said was, find the most talented person in the room, and if it's not you, go stand next to that person. And he, I think that's great advice.
That is, yeah.
And I certainly did that throughout school. I was like, all right, I need to be friends with the smart people here.
Well, I think your dad definitely was very gifted at making the most talented guy in the room infinitely even more talented.
Right, and he also, people would ask him if he was a class clown, and he said, no, I wrote for the class clown. So I think, the real lesson is about that sort of collaborative spirit and working together, and you all dedicate yourself to making each other look good, not just yourself.
Totally. Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, still riffing on that, if I could, since we're on the topic of Stewart Saves His Family.
Yes.
You said that movie was the closest you felt your dad to putting your family on screen, even though you guys are obviously
Did I
very
say
different
that?
from the Smalleys. I think something, maybe it wasn't in the book, but it might have been in an interview that I watched.
Okay.
I do a lot of research for panels, so.
Great.
I was curious because I love that movie from the time it came out, and it wasn't his most popular.
You're the only one.
I'm one of not as many as Ghostbusters, but I always really, when I watch that movie, I feel like I'm watching my family on screen. But then when I read your book, I feel like I was kind of reading about my family and even my dad and stuff like that. And is that just the Ramis writing magic, or like what,
I mean, I think one thing he was really great at is finding these universal themes, so yeah, my dad was not, the alcoholic, abusive jerk that the dad was in Stewart Saves His Family, but certainly struggled as, the patriarch of a big family, and I think, wasn't always able to be the parent that he necessarily wanted to be. And I think that, whether it's Stewart Saves His Family or, Bedazzled or Multiplicity, like you said, even Caddyshack and Animal House, like, you may not have had that fraternity experience, but you certainly have rebelled against something or wanted to, or been frustrated with the systems that you're dealing with. So I think he was just really good at sort of, pulling out these threads that anyone could relate to.
Very true. Absolutely. Well, before we wrap it up, obviously, the book's out. It's a very big success.
Book is out.
What's next for you? Are you thinking about another book, another movie?
Yeah, I'm going to do some more writing, and actually my sister Molly and you can read all about her in the book too.
I did. I might have looked at some of her stand-up on YouTube.
Yeah, she and I are thinking about, possibly working on something together.
Oh, that would be amazing.
So
I will be the first person in line for that.
I think that would be a lot of fun.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending the time
Thank
with us.
you.
Guys,
It's
give
really
a round
great
of
talking
applause
to
to
you.
Violet
Thank you
Ramis
so much
Stiel.
for coming.